Hi, welcome to C.S.E.C Social Studies Note-Taking on Regional Integration. This is our second note-taking on regional integration reference book, Social Studies for C.S.E.C, a Caribbean Examination Council study guide. So basically, I will call the heading and then you all will continue taking the notes. Now remember, before I start, I just want to remind students that in taking the note, that it is easy for students to pause the video at any point in time or rewind it to make sure that you all have gotten the correct note. So as a heading, regional integration. As a subheading, so you skip a line, major economic challenges. Skip a line, debt burden. Debt burden. DEBT, debt burden. Next line. Now debt burden could be number one. So number one, debt burden. Go to the next line. Countries borrow money from various sources, comma, including, colon, next line, first point, commercial, financial institutions. Next line, next point, regional institutions, comma, such as the Caribbean Development Bank. Next line, next point. International financial institutions, comma, such as the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund. Next line. Under the same point, we continuing under the same point. These borrowings, comma, or debts, comma, have to be repaid and this is known as a country's debt burden. First up, a debt is classified as sustainable as long as a debtor country is able to, colon, next line, first point, meet its current and future debt obligations in full, next line, next point, avoid seeking any debt relief, next line, next point, avoid accumulating any arrears, Next line, next point. Maintain an acceptable level of economic growth. Full stop. Skip a line. 2. Shortage of capital. Entrepreneurs and businesses need capital investment if they are to establish new businesses or expand existing operations. Full stop. The small economy of Caribbean nations, the small economy of Caribbean nations generally means that there are severe restrictions on the availability of public and private capital so this investment is not available locally. Full stop. When capital is obtained from external sources, it can result in increased foreign debt or simply lead to an increase in foreign-owned companies. Skip a line. 3. Productivity. Next line. Productivity is about the ability of a nation to harness its human and physical resources in order to generate economic growth. Full stop. It is often measured in terms of output, as against input, comma, with input being either labor alone or labor combined with capital, full stop. Across the Caribbean, comma, levels of productivity are low. Skip a line. 4. Limited physical resources and unequal resource distribution. I'll repeat that. Limited physical resources and unequal resource distribution. Next line. The Caribbean has limited mineral and energy resources and many countries have to spend large amounts on imports. Full stop. The natural resources available in the Caribbean are not equally distributed among the different countries and those with limited resources can feel disadvantaged. Full stop. Five, lack of diversification. Next line. The agricultural legacy of the plantation era in the Caribbean has seen a tendency towards monoculture, comma, which is the growing of a single crop, comma, and a consequent reliance on sales of one or two commodities, full stop. An overdependency on a limited range of these puts a country's economy in a vulnerable position, full stop. In response, comma, agricultural production needs to diversify so that a wider range of goods is available, full stop. It has also been necessary to apply diversification to tourism, comma, which has historically concentrated on cruise ship and resort-based products, full stop. New forms of tourism, comma, such as ecotourism and adventure tourism, comma, need to be developed further in order to continue to attract tourists using the unique features on offer in the Caribbean, full stop. Seven, imports and exports. Next line. The commodities and resources that most Caribbean countries need to import from outside the region are high value, while those they are able to export are low value, full stop. The result, sorry, I'm going to repeat that. This results in a negative balance of payments, full stop. Skip a line. 8. Markets in developed countries. Selling to markets in developed countries, is challenging for Caribbean countries, is challenging for Caribbean countries, partly because it is difficult to keep production costs down, which would allow products to be offered at competitive prices, full stop. Also, the small size of the country and inefficient production methods means that the quantity required by the international market cannot be produced, full stop. Skip a line. 9. Inadequate technology. Next line. A key to further development is the provision of high-speed broadband services and the availability of cheaper computers. Ten. Transport. Effective transport is a particularly important issue in the Caribbean since most nations are islands, physically separated from their neighbors, full stop. Eleven, natural disasters. Next line. The region faces challenges because it is susceptible, S-U-S-C-E-P-T-I-B-L-E, to a range of natural disasters caused by extreme weather conditions, comma, such as hurricanes and droughts, comma, and other phenomena such as volcanic eruptions, comma, earthquakes and landslides, full stop. All of these have devastating effects on societies and their economies, full stop. There are losses to business and a drop in productivity, comma, and at the same time there is an increased need for expenditure to repair damage, comma, rebuild infrastructure, and to enable people to return to work. So we'll stop there with the notes for today. However, we would go through what we took so far and have a brief discussion on these major economic challenges. So this part of the tutorial is not for you to take the note, but is for you to reflect on the note that was taken and to understand what the note was about. So obviously our small island nation states would give rise to a lot of economic challenges. In our last tutorial we spoke about things like, and trying to make a link between the topic resources, especially human resources and even natural resources, and link it back to this topic of CARICOM. Students who are doing any business subjects would also benefit. It will help them, it will benefit them in this topic as well, because it has a lot of studying regional integration. A lot of the problems to do with regional integration comes from the size of our nations, our lack of natural resources, or lack of development of natural resources that we do have, we have a problem with the amount of capital that we are able to put into our and develop our nation states, and how it trickles down to other business growth and development, and also in terms of our development of our human resource, how well are we able and how successful are we able in doing so, in an effort to try to use our human resource to further develop our natural resources, and to use our human resource to find other means of actually accumulating wealth in the CARICOM nation states, accumulating some sort of development, more development I should say, etc. Now one issue, as we see here at the first part of the note, would be our debt burden. Because we have limited amount of capital, and the Caribbean has encountered many difficulties in terms of too much importation, in terms of natural disasters, and many other social and economic issues that may come our way, whether it be poor governance, etc., corruption, or whatever it may be. We find ourselves in debt, in trying to make sure that all the social services that are required for the daily production of our society is maintained. Things like health, education, maintenance of infrastructure, and so many other things are maintained, and our economy keeps active and keeps growing. Again, another point that we have here would be the shortage of capital. So a lot of times, even if we have a lot of educated people, a lot of skilled people in the Caribbean, it is difficult for them to showcase, develop, and actually make their skill into something that is profitable, and in doing so, again overlapping with business and economics, etc., we have to understand in enabling people to use their skill and education to actually create wealth for themselves and for others. This is how the economy grows, and the nation states in the Caribbean, the different countries, will become more and more wealthier, will become more and more developed. So we actually have problems with shortage of capital. We frequently hear that we have a lot of skilled people, a lot of talented people in the Caribbean. Okay, we have so much skills, etc. We have Caribbean people throughout the world who are doing so many things, whether it be in medicine, in literature, in sports, and so many other things, in entertainment, etc. However, in the Caribbean, it is difficult for us to always harness our human resource in the best way possible, and harness our natural resource in the best way possible because of shortage of capital. Productivity is also an issue in a lot of Caribbean countries, again because of the same problem. It is very similar because of the inability to harness human and physical resources in some countries. So you find yourself in a lot of situations where you have monoculture in terms of producing the same thing over and over until it is exhausted, until we are dependent on certain natural resources, and it is difficult for us to recover if it is that these natural resources were hampered in some way through some sort of economic crisis, world crisis, whether it be pandemics as we have now throughout the world, okay, whether it be by hurricanes or earthquakes, etc. It is difficult if it is that for nation states to recover if we are dependent on monoculture. All right, so that leads us to the next point, or intertwines with the next point: limited physical resources and unequal resource distribution. Living in the Caribbean, we must realize by now that some nations are more dependent on one source or a very limited sources of income than others. And some of their income are very small compared to some other nation states. The islands that has more minerals, whether it be oil and gas, bauxite, iron ore, etc., they have a tendency to acquire more wealth. Now, it doesn't mean that the islands that are tourism, that rely on a tourism-based sector isn't doing well, and they are not taking care of all their social needs of the individuals in their country. It just means that, as we see here, that there's an unequal resource distribution. So, in other words, some countries are actually very, very dependent on tourism, very, very dependent on one or two crop production and tourism. And then you have some countries that have tourism, have one or two crop production, and also have minerals, and have more than one mineral. Say, for instance, like Jamaica. They would have tourism, they would have certain crop production, they would also have oil and gas and other mineral productions as well. So that is what we mean by unequal resource distribution. And then we have the issue with leading to some countries have the issue with lack of diversification. They become very, very dependent on monoculture, which is basically a legacy of the plantation era, where we had one crop production, and we would have seasonal crops, and then we'll have off season, and we keep rotating and learning to survive based on that. Okay, and if anything should happen, like if we should have storms, if we should have earthquakes or droughts, etc., then it will be devastating for a country. We have issues with imports and exports. This too is a legacy of colonialism. Not just a legacy of colonialism, but we will talk about the legacy of colonialism briefly, and then other issues as well. Imports and exports, we have a problem with balance of payments, meaning that we usually have a negative balance of payments in most Caribbean countries, where we have more imports than exports. This is a legacy of colonialism, slavery, indentureship, etc. It means that the prime focus of the colonies was just to produce a particular crop, whether it be sugarcane, bananas, whatever it is they were producing at that point in time under colonialism, mainly sugarcane. Okay, so that means that they were not concerned with producing a lot of food. They would produce food, mind you, but not a lot. They would import almost everything else that they needed, from clothing to food, furniture, building materials, a lot of things. Okay, so we inherited that concept of still depending on basically one or two means of gaining wealth, and then spending that wealth and even more on actually importing everything else that we need. So we have a problem with imports and exports. In relation to that as well, we also have a problem with the high quality of imports that we actually bring into the country. We bring in things like cars, we bring in things like high-end furnitures, building materials, we we bring in a lot of expensive stuff into the country, and yet what are we actually selling to the world? Sometimes the value is not as much. So I guess from that, if you think about it, you can do the maths and think about how this is affecting our Caribbean nation states as well. Imports and exports and balance of payments. Our imports are greater than our exports. So this is a problem because we are going through different problems that we are having or have had or continue to have in Caribbean nation states. So markets in developed countries, we have great ideas here in the Caribbean. We have great ideas for food production, fast food production. We have great ideas for canning and preserving, for making different condiments, seasonings, okay, and a lot of different food products, even clothing, etc. However, to break through into foreign markets, and this point is very important for a later note, to break through into foreign markets is a major issue for Caribbean people, because one could be our quality of product. Two, even if we have a great quality product, the cost to produce it is so high that it is difficult to compete with the cost of something sold in America. By the time we produce it in Trinidad or Jamaica or Guyana or Barbados, and the cost to take it to America, pay all the duties to get it into America, all the taxes that they would fine for actually setting up your business there, etc., and allocating spaces on shelves and groceries and stores, etc., and then to realize that you would have to sell your product at 20 US and an American company can sell something similar to yours, whether it be a soft drink, a beer, or a piece of clothing, etc., for $1 or $2. How can our people actually break through that market? Now, if we can, that will be, and we have people who have broken through the market to a certain extent, that would mean that a lot of these people will basically be millionaires. They will create a lot and generate a lot of wealth for our Caribbean people. But it is difficult to do so. So in a later note, we will understand how CARICOM and regional integration cushions that to a certain extent. Our next issue is inadequate technology. Well, presently in the Caribbean, we have a lot of technology available. Right now, we're using technology in order for us to get this note, in order for you to learn. So technology, we have bridged a lot of gap in technology. And with the present pandemic happening now, this note is given in the year 2020. May of 2020, we are facing a pandemic right now, and we are reliant and dependent on technology to actually bridge the gap, to actually be able to reach customers, etc., and to continue business in some form. So this is what the note has given, but technology has improved in terms of communication a lot in the Caribbean. However, there are still a lot of people, because part of the note is saying that they need cheaper computers. There are still a lot of people in the Caribbean who are unable to access proper devices for learning, etc. Everybody is on Facebook, everybody is on Instagram, on all these different social medias, looking at YouTube videos and all these other different means of whatever. But how many of these devices can actually help assist people in learning, in business, in communicating, right? In actually accessing how many people can access their bank accounts, all these different things that technology is supposed to actually help with. How many people can work from home, etc. Transport is also an issue because over the years that I have known, we keep hearing about the government wanting to have more ferry services because some of the islands are pretty close to each other, but yet transportation is an issue for people to move even more freely, and goods and services, labor, etc., to move more freely between nations. This will actually help the economy. Natural disasters is a big one. Right now we are in a pandemic, and our governments frequently speak about upcoming natural disasters is another thing that some nations have to look forward to. Okay, not look forward to in a good way, but look forward to, like, we already had one major issue in holding back or creating issues for our economy, and now if we have natural disasters, it is devastating on the economy, on crop production, on the tourism sector, etc. Because, and even sometimes for people whose homes have been devastated, whose businesses have been devastated, the government usually has to step in, and again, sometimes they have to get themselves in even more debt. Presently, Trinidad and Tobago has incurred, as they stated, as of May 2020, they say approximately $6 billion because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I don't know if that is in US or TT, but basically they have announced that they will be putting themselves in more debt to make sure that they secure social services, that they secure healthcare, that they secure whether it be social welfare services for people who are in need, etc. So natural disasters, and maybe they will have to add to the text eventually, whether it be epidemics or pandemics, which is a new thing now, because we had other epidemics like Zika and all these different things, and now we have a worldwide disaster, which is not, or is it a natural disaster? But it is a disaster that we are facing. So basically, just imagine our Caribbean countries. Sometimes we look at the government, and yes, the government sometimes could do more. Any government in any country can do more, and you will have faults with any country. It doesn't matter if it's Russia, if it's China, if it is the United States of America, or even if it's Trinidad and Tobago. All governments can do something more. However, we have to ask ourselves, as social studies students and as business students, given our circumstances, our history in terms of slavery, indentureship, colonization, monoculture, monocrop culture, as some may state, okay, and we have small islands, we have limited land space, we have limited resources, we have so many skilled people, but we have limited capital, We have limited, it's like we are limited nations. We have a long way to go, and regional integration is supposed to actually encompass that, assist with that, and help us to move forward. So basically what we have to learn and understand is our problems, and in further notes to come we will try to understand how regional integration can bridge the gap in terms of limited land space, in terms of limited education, in terms of all these other limited things that we have. Okay, so I hope that today's tutorial was helpful to you. And please take your note. Please listen to the entire video. I mean, if you didn't listen to it, you wouldn't actually hear me telling you now to listen to it. But I hope that you did listen to it, and you did follow the note while you were listening to it, and try to even make your own individual notes, side notes, and whether it be in your margins, etc. Right? You have to try to be more responsible where your education is concerned, more proactive, right? And not be like some of our Caribbean countries and be totally dependent on one thing. You have your eyes set on one thing, and I don't want to see anything else. I don't want to see online education. I don't want to see anything else. I don't want to see another teacher. I don't want to see another tutor. I don't want to see another method of learning. And at the end of the day, if a disaster hits, then we are left with nothing. So you have to step forward and you have to try to help yourselves a little more. I hope that you had listened to this tutorial and reached to the end and actually take my advice. So have a good day.